Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Kia ora, I rise to oppose this law. Mr Speaker, this bill, which the National Party members are trying to say is simply a technical bill to fix a loophole, I believe needs greater scrutiny, it needs greater intellectual rigour, and it needs greater public discussion. Mr Speaker, this bill effectively allows the marine consent conditions that apply where an objection is lodged to continue even if the petroleum company's licence has expired. Now, Mr Speaker, we're well aware this bill is going to pass its first reading. Had it been the Green Party with the casting vote, we would have demanded more information in advance, and our vote, I'm the first to acknowledge, may well have been different. But Mr Speaker, in the absence of that, in the absence of adequate, appropriate information from the government, from officials, I'm proud that my party is lodging a protest vote. Mr Speaker, we will be opposing this law because the government has not adequately made the case it is the only option available to us. This looks like yet another example under John Key of one law for oil. Thirdly, this treats the locals in Taranaki in an absolutely unequal fashion. Iwi, Hapu, local community groups haven't had their submissions extended despite a story which I'll paint, yet Shell Todd Oil gets laws changed in our parliament. So Mr Speaker, this bill is not about fixing a loophole. Let's challenge that myth, that piece of propaganda up front. This is about giving Shell, Todd Oil, more time to get a resource consent because they didn't get their act together properly to apply for this marine consent over the last 3 years. We know this company's had this marine licence for 35 years. They were heavily involved in submitting, assisting with the drafting of this now 3-year-old legislation, yet they messed up. They didn't get their application in on time, and they didn't put in an application which was fine for the EPA, who then required 44 separate requests for additional information from Shell Todd Oil, yet the public didn't get an extension to comment on those. Mr Speaker, what we're seeing here is another bill in Parliament passed for one specific industry, a winner that the national government, the supposedly free market and freedom party, has picked, the oil industry, one of the most profitable sectors in the world. However, Mr Speaker, as I've acknowledged, our vote may well change in the future. We go into the select committee process with an open mind. We welcome the submissions. We want to question the applicant and associated parties. But Mr Speaker, at this point, with such inadequate information, we cannot support this law. So my first point is the Green Party does not want to see the Maui platform shut down, but we are worried about changing the legislation to suit a company who didn't get their application in with enough time and in an appropriate format that didn't require 4 full pages of additional information requested from the EPA. We have a number of questions which the Minister, I think, needs to front and explain. Why, when Cabinet agreed to this course of action on December the 8th, 2014, did we not hear about it until last Tuesday when I was questioning the government around Chatham Rock Phosphate's declined application? Why the months of delay? Why did the government decide to only consult with the applicant, Shell Todd Oil, and related government departments, not the public? Not the iwi and hapu, who this oil actually belongs to, which belongs to all New Zealanders. They only consulted the applicant and government departments. The critical question, and I hope some national member can explain this to me, and I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Cabinet, according to the Regulatory Impact Assessment, made this decision to go down this course of action on December the 8th, 2014. Yet Shell Todd Oil only put in their application on December the 15th. The EPA only accepted it on the 12th of January 2015 to meet their fast-looming 27 June 2015 deadline. So Cabinet agreed to change the law before this company even put their application into the EPA. Mr. Speaker, to me it looks like this company spent its time lobbying government ministers rather than actually getting their application in on time. This is an application which lasted for 35 years, a legislation which had been in place for 3 years, a company who had been heavily involved in the process to pass that legislation, couldn't get their ducks in a row, couldn't get their timings right, so they ran to the government and said, look, can you pass a law for us? Mr. Speaker, we have to ask why the application was so inadequate. 45 additional pieces of information were required. This isn't a loophole. This is a mess that the government is cleaning up with statutory power. Passing laws is it is the most important power each member in this Parliament has. A privilege bestowed upon us thanks to constitutional history and the work of many countless individuals over the course of time. Here we are using our most powerful ability to pass a law to benefit a single company who need their mess cleaned up. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we're happy to reconsider the process. We'll be going into the Select Committee and with an open mind, wanting to ask questions. But Mr. Speaker, the main point we want to challenge is the, quote, significant economic impact that we've heard from the government benches. Mr. Speaker, Nick Smith blatantly exaggerated the impact on New Zealand last week when he said some 40% of our country's gas could be at stake. All the official documents state it's in the order of around 20%. So here's a minister doubling the gas impact for New Zealand in his public commentary. Mr. Speaker, there has been no explanation why this company, who obviously knew about this issue months before Cabinet discussed it and agreed to this course of action, presumably, why this company didn't put in place alternative supply arrangements, didn't source alternative supplies of gas, didn't talk to other gas suppliers around potential arrangements there. Mr. Speaker, we often hear the National Party talk about personal responsibility. For a beneficiary who's gone to a government department and been told, sorry, the rules are the rules, you didn't get your thing in on time. For a charity who's applied for government funding to do some good in their community who's told, sorry, the deadline has passed, the rules are the rules. However, when it comes to the oil industry and Shell Todd Oil, the government is quite prepared to jump and ask how high if they're asked to jump. Mr. Speaker, the fact is there's been no explanation how this will have significant economic impact. If that point can be proved, the Green Party is, I believe, highly likely to support. We do not want to see families go without gas for their cooking. We do not want to see industrial consumers be forced to close down because of gas supply. But if this is simply about saving a particular company money to avoid particular contractual penalties if they can't meet their supply agreements, Mr. Speaker, I think the public of New Zealand would look at this House and the passing of law in a different eye. The locals haven't been given an extension of submissions despite requesting it, despite all the additional information requested, despite the fact this company still will not release the oil spill response plan. Mr. Speaker, I believe New Zealanders are looking to this Parliament to say we need a separation of oil and state. Already in my career, Mr. Parliament, in the last 3 years, I've seen laws for oil. When Petrobras had a iwi Te Whanuapanui fishing boat sailing in front of it, the government called out the Navy. When Anadarko was worried that they may see protesters off their shores, we passed the Anadarko Amendment under urgency. When the oil industry wanted help promoting itself, the government thought it would fork out $240,000 of taxpayers' money on 11 executives for only 4 days. Mr. Speaker, we've got the 4th lowest tax plus royalty rate in the world, $46 million in tax breaks per annum. This sector, one of the most profitable in the world, has been picked as the champion, as a winner by this government, and here we see another law for oil. But Mr. Speaker, there's an opportunity cost. the government, the cabinet, the officials, this parliament. We could have been rolling out a network of modern infrastructure, electric vehicle charging stations during this time. We could have been rolling back those tax breaks and investing it in clean energy, growing jobs and boosting regional economies. We could have been giving solar a fair go for all those thousands of consumers who feel ripped off by the power companies when they have those solar panels on their roofs. We could have been establishing a green investment bank to drive the growth of the New Zealand economy in terms of green investment, clean energy. But no, Mr. Speaker, we're passing another law for oil. We go into it with an open mind. We're not locked into this vote, but Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to cast a protest vote.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Fletcher Tabuteau.
Thank you, sir. I'm proud to stand on behalf of New Zealand